Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mad Logic Mysteries. I am, of course, Mad Logic. In this episode, we have for you the abduction of Jack Davey. Was he taken to another planet or another dimension? Was he even abducted at all? And then we have a story from Brad, who is a very good friend of the show. Brad experienced a few strange situations after moving into his current home, and he shares one of those with us today. Then we have a couple of first-hand accounts of encounters with the mysterious Duende. And lastly, a boy takes a rosary off of a tombstone on his way home. Is this what triggered mysterious phone calls from a very devilish number and being stalked by a giant bird-like creature? Let's get into the stories. For just 1 second before we dive into the stories, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. I also want to encourage you to send us your story. You can do so by calling us at 754-666-2566 and leaving a voicemail. You can also email us at madlogicmysteries@gmail.com. You can also get in touch with us at any of our social media accounts: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and even our very own subreddit. We also have a dedicated message board that we call the Tomb, which is an acronym which stands for the Ouija message boards. I thought that was kind of clever. There you'll find discussion threads dedicated to dozens of the most popular paranormal and true crime categories. You can even be one of the first to participate. You can find the Tomb at madlogicmysteries.proboards.com. That's madlogicmysteries.proboards.com. Lastly, we're also getting ready to add a Patreon element to Mad Logic Mysteries, but we need your input. What kind of rewards or perks would you like to see as a Patreon supporter? So use any of these methods to contact us and give us your story. You may just hear yours in a future episode. Thanks for listening, and now let's start the show. Our first story comes to us from the subreddit Humanoid Encounters and user Dirty Hole 2. Come on. It's a family show, Dirty Hole 2. Anyway, our first story is the abduction of Jack Davey. They sourced this from a book called Humanoid Encounters 1970 through 1974, The Others Among Us. In June of 1970, Jack Davey, a geology student in his mid-20s, was riding his motorcycle towards Jenolan Caves in Oberon, New South Wales, Australia. It was around 10 a.m., and the sky started to darken when he decided to continue towards the Kingara Walls. As he reached the turnoff near Oberon, he was suddenly overcome by a silvery glow that lit up the road in front of him. Unable to stop, he drove straight into the glow. The bright yet not blinding glow, due to the recently darkened sky, illuminated the surrounding forest, seemingly originating from above. Once Jack had entered the glow, he found himself suddenly lifted and began to float rather quickly towards a huge circular object. Once he arrived inside the object, the floor, which was open for him to enter the craft, closed up beneath him. He found himself standing inside a glowing light blue room. The room was flat, hexagonal-shaped, with a domed ceiling, and was about 50 feet across and 12 feet high. Jack was terrified, but then felt a voice telling him that all was well. Upon hearing this, he began to relax. Suddenly, a section of one of the walls slid open, and 3 entities about 6 feet tall, grayish-blue in color, and alien in appearance, approached him. These beings, while alien-looking, had similar features to us, namely, similar-looking teeth inside a small mouth and noses like ours. As all the entities were naked and male, Jack noticed that their sex organs were also similar to ours. Their eyes, however, were like those of a doe. The beings led him into another large room where everything was of a light blue color. The room had several strange pieces of equipment and apparatuses, as well as a large metallic oblong block in the room's center, which had a body-shaped groove or depression in it. The entities proceeded to poke and prod at Jack initially with his clothes on, but eventually they removed his clothes, and the entities telepathically asked him to lie in the body-shaped depression in the block in the middle of the room. Jack proceeded to do so, and upon lying there, he suddenly felt magnetized and glued to the metal. The entities then proceeded to leave him alone, and as time went on, Jack passed out. Jack was unconscious for an indiscernible amount of time, but when he did come to, he found that he was surrounded by multiple blue beings. 2 of these entities held his clothes, shoes, and personal belongings. Jack was now able to get up from the metallic block and then began to dress himself as all the beings watched. Upon being fully clothed, the entities led him through an open wall, which led to a brightly lit passageway that came to a large tube-shaped walkway that was 20 feet wide. Somehow Jack and the entities had left the craft as they had entered a great hall through seemingly the roof of a colossal building. As he looked around, he saw countless other entities, both male and female, talking telepathically to each other. The females, he noticed, were more slender and reached up to 5 feet tall. He then entered a great open stone-paved plaza. In this plaza, there were various buildings seemingly made of glass-like metal and formed in a variety of shapes such as domes, pyramids, and squares. There were metallic roads traveled on by hovercrafts, and some of the beings had a backpack-like rocket apparatus that they manipulated with buttons found on their chests. He was led through this plaza by 2 of the crewmen from the ship and was watched by hundreds of these beings. One thing Jack noticed, however, was that not all the beings were blue like those on the ship, but many were of other colors. The crewman led Jack to a house-sized, green-colored building that was dome-shaped and told him that this would be his temporary residence for now. Upon looking around, Jack noticed that the building was filled with oddly shaped furniture and a peculiar, soft yet rubbery squared substance that appeared to be a bed. The building also came with a toilet similar to ours, yet there were some differences. For one, it seemed to have been made of a kind of crystal metallic substance, and to empty the bowl, one would need to press a button which would evaporate the waste. The 2 crewmen proceeded to show him various foods and drinks that were in the home. The food consisted mainly of various fruits and vegetables, many of which were large and round, while others were in various shapes. The drinks were of a multitude of colors and held in plastic jars and bottle-type containers. The crewmen proceeded telepathically to tell Jack how to eat and drink these foods before they left him to his new home. In his time on the entity's dimension or planet, he never saw them eat anything resembling meat. Jack had been awake since his first day and asked the beings audibly, "Where am I? Where have you taken me?" as well as who they were, yet the beings gave him no response. However, he soon learned that he could think about the questions and then receive answers, yet the exact answers he wanted would not be given to him until later. Jack, at one point during his stay, was flown in an oval-shaped hovercraft vehicle along a metallic road and was shown what seemed to him to be a vast museum-like building whose exhibits were limitless and could only be visited by hovercraft, as each display was approximately 500 meters from each other. In another instance, he was on a hovercraft and had entered what his guide told him was another world, located in another time period and on a higher vibration than that from which he had come. This area, he was shown, had narrow waterways and a few wide rivers that wound into a countryside of both green and other colored grass-like plants. He saw this area was forested with trees, some reaching almost 400 feet tall. There along the road were colossal blooming yellow flowers and flowers of other varieties, and these stretched into the hills. This world had a sun much larger than ours, and Jack would claim that the atmosphere was a greenish-blue pale color. The sky was clear, and the temperature was neither very cold nor hot. Jack had stopped on top of a hill and looked out at a vast ocean, and this ocean was filled with all sorts of watercraft, and it was at that moment that his two guides told him that this water, unlike our own oceans, was drinkable. He then returned home, and his guides promised that he would be picked up again tomorrow. Darkness soon fell over his new home, and he fell asleep quickly. Jack, slightly perplexed and troubled by his abduction, knew he could do nothing but follow their orders. He did not know how long he had slept, but he soon was awoken by the two entities who had escorted him. Jack began to beg him to let him go home, but they told him that they had no advice on this yet. Instead, they led him into the city center into a glass building, where he was brought before a male and female being. He sat down on a comfortable rubbery couch, and they told him that he had been taken randomly for study. They had studied him even when he was alone in his new home and when he was asleep, but they did not explain how. He was then told a little bit about his captors. They informed him that all the beings in this world had names, and they were ruled by leadership. Theirs was not the only race on their gigantic planet, which was 4 times the size of Earth, but there were 6 different similar races. Jack tried to ask the two beings their names as well as other questions, but they led him instead to a kind of elevator, which led to a wide round room of metal that was at least 150 feet in width and about 20 feet high and had a door-sized metal frame. Jack was told to pass through this frame, and upon doing so, he entered a whole new dimension. As he went through this dimension, he entered a kind of living movie where he saw scenes of the environment, the inhabitants, and strange animals. As he stepped back through the dimensional door, the scene vanished. Jack felt as though he had spent several months to years on this strange new world, and soon he would learn more from his extraterrestrial captors. Some of the female beings told him many things about the advanced cultures on the planet, which he would then learn was named Rixacron. During his time there, he learned that his memory bank had been studied and his brain has been tapped. The beings from this world knew all about his life, and he was told by a male entity that humans were still in a very low stage of evolution compared with their own. He was then put into a trance-like state, and certain information about his planet and other worlds in space was implanted in his mind. Before he lost consciousness, he was informed that the inhabitants of his planet were called ultra beings, at the very peak of evolution, and when he came to, he would possess higher knowledge. Jack woke up after this final message, lying in the middle of the road beside his motorcycle. Dazed, Jack took a moment to get up and reeled in the experience he had encountered. He looked at his watch and realized that he had woken up half an hour before his abduction. He was alone, and no other vehicles were around, so he got up, started his motorcycle, and returned home. However, when he proceeded to tell his family about his encounter, none of them believed him. One thing he realized about his encounter, however, was that he could only remember the information implanted in his mind while in the trance state. Jack eventually got in touch with Fortean researcher Rex Gilroy in August of 1973 and told him about his encounter. After this, however, Jack left the country with his family after suffering a breakdown because of this experience. Oh, that's quite a story. I guess my analysis would be, even though this account is written up as an alien abduction type story, it really feels more like a near-death experience to me. I mean, it certainly does have elements of a classic alien abduction, such as there's a craft, Jack is stripped down and told to lie on a slab, names of other planets are mentioned, etc. However, there are other things that are consistent with a near-death experience, such as beings being very similar to humans, large areas with various types of unique architecture, and the mention of another realm on a higher vibrational plane. All of those line up pretty well with some NDEs that I've read about. But the toilets, I mean, I'd say extraterrestrials are more likely to have to drop a deuce than, say, angels. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. As far as follow-up research item goes, it is somewhat interesting to note that the Jenolan Caves aren't that far from a place called Vulcan. Mr. Davey didn't mention any beings with pointy ears, but there was a fair degree of mind melding going on, so I guess live long and prosper. Coincidentally, this area mentioned in the story is currently closed due to weather-related disaster. And to be honest, when it comes to research, I did a fair amount of digging after reading this account, and I can't find anything that verifies that this is an actual account of events or anything more than a creative post by a creative Redditor. If you happen to come across anything in your own internet travels, please be sure to drop us a line. And now for our next story. This one is from Brad, a very good friend of the show. He told me this story, and he was also kind enough to allow me to share it with all of you. So without further ado, here's Brad.
Hey man, it's Brad. Heard you were looking for some paranormal stories, so I got one for you. I got an even better one. I'm not sure when to tell it, but it's a doozy. We'll start out small with this one. We'll see how it goes. So this goes back a few years. My son was still a baby, and he was still drinking from a bottle, waking up in the middle of the night. So that kind of sets the stage for what's about to happen. And he wakes up. I go into his room, feed him his bottle. He's laying back down on me. I'm sitting in a chair. And then all of a sudden he just sits straight up and just eyes lock on the door. And just staring over that area. And it's not fear. You know, I'm looking at him, wondering if he's going to throw up or if he's going to get sick or something. And it's just kind of a look of contentment, almost like a smile. And that was weird enough. And then all of a sudden this music comes on in the room. And there's a toy that plays this music. And it also has a remote. The remote's nowhere near us, so we're not touching the buttons. And then the song that comes on is his favorite song. And the only way to get to that song is to turn the device on and to hit a few buttons to get to it. You can't get right to the song by turning it on. So I recognized that right away. I thought that was strange. I noticed the temperature in the room dropped, and I thought it was the air conditioner. And now I'm starting to put puzzle pieces together here. And now I'm starting to think something's going on. But I wasn't worried. There was no fear. It was just an experience. And then as I'm putting him back to bed, walking out the room, I look over at this digital thermometer, which is sitting on this dresser, and it's not displaying anything. It's just there's crazy characters all over it, which is just very strange. And I have these devices all over the house. I've never seen that one or any other do that same thing ever again. The batteries did need to be changed because I don't think I've ever changed a battery in that. It's the same battery, I believe. And the same with the toy. The batteries in that toy were brand new. It lasted for a whole other year plus. So it wasn't dead or dying batteries that were making that device fail. So I was obviously thinking about this the next morning. I wasn't worried, but I was trying to explain it away, and I'll come back to my actions that morning. But a few days later, I'm telling this story to a family member, and they say, "What day was this?" I said, "I don't know. It was a few days ago. I can't remember exactly which day it was." I said, "Well, you need to find out what day it was because, a few days ago was Grandpa's birthday." And so Grandpa had died about a year before this event happened. So I'm trying to remember this day, what day it was. And so I go look at my browser history because the next morning I was doing internet searches to try to find if this toy was coming on by itself, if other people reported this. That's how real this was. I was looking for a way to explain why this toy was playing this music all by itself. And I looked at the date of this search, and the date of the search was the same day as this event. And it was after midnight. It was around 2:30 in the morning or 3:30 in the morning. This actually happened. And that was Grandpa's birthday. So I guess on Grandpa's birthday, he decided that he was going to come visit and see my son. Let my son see him, turn on his favorite music, and screw around with my thermometer. So that's it. Very real moment. Never forget it. Anyhow, that's that. So I'll let you know if I want to tell you this other story. I promise you, it's a big one. I've never told the story before, so I'll let you know.
Thank you, Brad. That's a great story. In fact, it also serves as a great reminder that not all ghost stories are scary or horrific in nature. Some of them are like this. I would even go as far as to say, this one's heartwarming. When you think about it, wouldn't you want one of your loved ones, be they a relative or friend, to be able to come back and visit you so that they could see how your life is going? Your children, your career, your relationships, just your life in general. Stories like this are a great reminder that those who are no longer physically with us may still be with us spiritually. They just want to be kept up to date with how your life is going because they love you. Maybe they're even keeping a watchful eye over you, a protective eye. I know that I have more than a few friends and relatives that, if there is a way to come back and visit, or at least to come back to see what's been going on, I know that they would. If there is a way at all, I know they would find it, and I know they could pull it off. Which begs the question, how often do they check in, do you think? Do you think it's the anniversaries of certain events, such as Brad's grandfather's birthday? Do you think it's on spiritually charged holidays like Christmas, Easter, or Hanukkah? It's very telling that Brad's son, and Brad himself for that matter, did not get a feeling of fright or fear when this event happened. I believe that if our loved ones can come back and visit, or at least witness what's going on with us, I believe they also have the ability to do it in such a way that doesn't scare us. That would be contradictory to their motivations. Brad himself did what I probably would have done when he searched the internet for cases of that toy playing on its own. But like Brad said, even if the toy did turn on, there was no way for that song to play immediately upon being turned on. It would have had to have turned on and then received some sort of input to get to that song, and then presumably even input to play that song. It's very, very strange, but after reading about and hearing so many stories like this that are scary, terrifying, and in some cases horrific, stories like this, it just feels like a big hug from a loved one. Now, does anyone know for certain that this was actually Brad's grandfather? No, of course not. No one can say that with 100% certainty, although I am sure that Brad is 99.9% certain. But I can tell you this. I may not know for sure that it's his grandfather, but I can certainly say that I hope that it is. I hope that Brad's grandfather got to meet that little boy. Put yourself in Brad's grandfather's shoes. How amazing would it be to have passed on and still have the ability to come back and see your grandson? Brad, thank you so much for the story. And you know, my friend, that you always have an open invitation to come back and share anything else you want with us. God bless you, brother. And now for our next story. Have you ever heard of a duende? If you haven't and you want to Google it for yourself, it's spelled D-U-E-N-D-E, duende. Well, what is a duende? If you're unfamiliar, Wikipedia defines a duende as a humanoid figure of folklore with various iterations from Iberian, Ibero, American, and Filipino cultures. They're comparable to dwarves, gnomes, or leprechauns. In Spanish, duende originated as a contraction of the phrase duendo de casa or duende casa, effectively meaning master of the house, or perhaps derived from some similar mythical being of the Visigoth or Sueban culture, given its comparable looks with the tomte of the Swedish language, conceptualized as a mischievous spirit inhabiting a dwelling. In the Hispanic folklore of Mexico and the American Southwest, duendes are known as gnome-like creatures who live inside the walls of homes, especially in the bedroom walls of young children. What could possibly go wrong? They attempt to clip the toenails of unkempt children, often leading to the mistaken removal of entire toes. Well, there you go. That's what can go wrong. From occultworld.com. In Spain and Portugal, the word duende refers to spirits like goblins or sprites. Like the English term goblin, duende is a vague term. A duende may be any kind of small spirit. In general, they are associated with wild nature, very much like a sprite, although the word is sometimes used to indicate small household helper spirits like a brownie or lutein. They are mischievous and sometimes have a wicked sense of humor, but are generally not harmful, although there are exceptions. In parts of Latin America, however, the term duende refers to a more specific type of spirit. Duendes are tiny ghosts, souls of fetuses and unbaptized infants. They are hungry, persistent, nagging ghosts. It is difficult to reason with them or propitiate with them because they do not speak or comprehend. They just yearn and crave. The most dangerous duendes are souls of undesired, discarded newborn infants who have been killed, suffocated, strangled, drowned, or whatever, or just abandoned and left for dead. Duendes haunt sources of fresh water, such as rivers, streams, or springs, but they usually try to rejoin the families into which they have anticipated being born. It is unclear whether they are angry and intend to cause harm, or whether their presence alone is sufficiently toxic. They are potentially harmful, especially to living siblings who are often the only ones able to see them. Duendes should be professionally exorcised, but because many are the result of secret pregnancies, they are left to cause illness and harm. This story comes from Objective Thanks 163 from Reddit. It's entitled, "My Dad Was Followed Home by Duendes." My dad told me a story recently that I've really been wanting to share. This is from back when he was a kid in Mexico. When my dad was a kid, he and my grandpa went to my grandpa's land to prepare the soil for planting crops. Bored, my dad wandered off to a nearby stream where he saw a bunch of human-like dolls playing around in the water. He said they looked like adults, only smaller. With proportions like dolls, they splashed around in the water, and at times it looked like they were even walking on it. They signaled at him to come and play, and my dad ran over excitedly. He said he played with them for a while when my grandpa noticed that he had wandered off and then went to find him. When he did find him, he was seemingly playing alone in the stream, getting all wet. He got super mad, and the grandfather dragged him away. Apparently, the grandfather and grandma were never able to see the duendes when Dad would point them out. My dad still recalls looking back while my grandpa yanked him away and seeing the duendes waving goodbye at him. After that, my dad started seeing duendes around the house. They'd pop out from behind walls during dinner, and my dad would try to feed them scraps of food, much to my grandparents' annoyance. Eventually, they got worried and took him to a local cuandrera. She did a little ritual and told him to keep a cigarette behind his ear for a week. And then the duendes were gone. He never saw them again. My dad swears it's all true, even though no one believes him, and he's embarrassed about even telling the story. The only reason he told me was because my mom teased him about it the other day, and I forced it out of him. I love these kind of stories and really wanted to share. My aunts and uncles say duendes aren't always so friendly and told me some other creepy stories about them. Wow. Well, that's quite a story. Analyzing this, it would seem that the physical description of the humanoids in the story does correlate to that of the duende. Tiny creatures that look like humans, only smaller. I suppose the case could be made that they also exhibited a degree of charisma in successfully getting your dad to join them and playing in the water. And speaking of water, that's also where a lot of sightings and encounters with duende seem to occur, like I mentioned before, rivers, streams, and springs. Now, I haven't been able to uncover any more in regards to why a cigarette behind the ear would serve as any type of ward or repellent. If any of you have some insight or a lead on that, please let me know in the tomb or the YouTube comments, one of our social media accounts, email, or phone. Maybe the strategy was to make the duende think the kid was from the wrong side of the tracks and cross the street to avoid him. Who knows? Very good, though. I appreciate the story. Well, and I promised you 2 stories about the duende, so here's number 2. This one was emailed in to us by Anonymous from San Jose, California, and the subject is a duende encounter in the forest at night. The night was dark and quiet as I made my way through the forest. I was on my way back from a long day of hiking when I suddenly heard a faint giggle coming from behind a nearby tree. Curiosity getting the better of me, I approached the tree, but as I got closer, the giggling stopped abruptly, and a feeling of unease washed over me. Suddenly, I heard the sound of tiny footsteps running away from me. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. That's when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head just in time to see a small, humanoid creature darting behind a nearby rock. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I realized what I was looking at. A duende. I had heard stories about this mischievous little creature before, but I'd never really thought I would actually get to see one. I took a step back, but the duende continued to giggle and play, taunting me with its tiny clawed hands. It was only when I felt a sharp pain in my ankle that I realized I was in trouble. I had misstepped and twisted my ankle. I tried to run, but the duende was too quick, and it seemed to know the forest way better than I did. Every time I turned a corner, it was there, giggling and taunting me. I was trapped. As the night went on, the duende grew more aggressive, and I grew more desperate. I tried everything I could think of to escape, but nothing worked. Finally, as dawn approached, the duende disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. I was left alone in the forest, scared and bewildered. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and hoped I never would again. The duende may have been small, but it was powerful and dangerous, and I knew that I had been lucky to escape. From that day on, I make sure to steer clear of the forest at night, knowing that that duende could still be out there, waiting for either me or its next victim. Wow, now that is definitely too close for comfort. I have to ask, were there any bodies of water in the immediate vicinity, like rivers, streams, or springs? Oh my. Did you get the feeling that it was trying to hurt you physically? Or did you feel any sort of a possession vibe from it? Because apparently, they've been known to possess. With more about that, here's Sapphire Sandalo from the Snarled YouTube channel.
Hey, I'm Sapphire. Want to hear something scary? So this is a story that my aunt told me happened to her when she was in her mid-20s. She was living in the Philippines at the time, and she had a niece who was a freshman in high school. So one day, the high school called her and said, "You need to get over here right now. Your niece is acting really weird." And my aunt had no idea what they were talking about. And so when she got to the school, her niece was sitting on a chair and she looked really out of it. And if anyone tried to touch her,
she would violently hit their hand away and yell at them in a cold, deep voice that clearly wasn't hers. So they had no idea what to do, so they called the sheriff of the town to see if he had any ideas. And so the sheriff got there, and it was pretty clear to him that she was probably possessed by something. And so he asked her, "What are you doing to this girl? Why are you here?"
She hurt my children. She stepped on my house
"Wait, how is that even possible? Where is your house?"
outside of the school.
So there's this Filipino superstition that you shouldn't step on ant hills or termite hills, basically any mound of dirt in the ground, because there's a creature that lives in them called the Duende. Duendes are sort of similar to elves or goblins, and they're invisible to most people, but they do show themselves to children or some adults that they choose. They mostly just leave you alone, but if you mess with them, they can bring you a lot of bad luck and misfortune, and in the worst case, death. And right outside the school is filled with anthills. So unfortunately, my aunt's niece did not know about this rule. So the sheriff started pleading with this spirit inside the girl. "She's just a kid. I'm sure it was just an accident. What can we do so that you will forgive her and leave her alone?"
Get bananas, oranges, and salt and bring it to my house.
So they went to the store and they got a bunch of fruit and salt, and then they placed it all around the anthills that were outside of the school.
And then when they went back inside the school, my aunt's niece was totally normal. Like, she didn't even know what had happened. And she didn't remember speaking in any weird voice. She just thought that she fell asleep.
My aunt is a super sane person. I have no reason to believe that she would ever lie about this. Something that makes this story a little weirder for me is that this is not the first story about a duende that family members have told me. So my mom's side of the family used to live in Hawaii when she was younger. When my uncle was 3 years old, one day he sort of just went missing for a few hours, and so everyone was looking for him.
A few hours later, he just showed up at the front door, and they're like, "Where did you go?" And he said, "Oh, I was playing with the little people." So my family is pretty convinced that the little people that he was playing with were duendes. What do you guys think? Do you think there's any logical explanation for what my aunt witnessed? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it.
Our final story of this episode comes to us from CKChris45 on Reddit. Did a rosary stolen from a gravestone result in a giant chicken stalking? Maybe Peter Griffin could give us a solid lead. His story goes as follows. I was probably 17 or 18 at the time, so this was like 2011 or 2012. My buddy, who lived a few blocks away from me, stole a rosary off a headstone at the cemetery. This is an old cemetery, so old that the founders of our town are buried there. And connected to the cemetery is an old farmhouse. The whole area is definitely haunted. We would always shortcut through there to get to our neighborhood. I wasn't with him when he took the rosary, but I met up with him at his house later that night. We were all just hanging out on the couch when his phone rang. His phone was on the coffee table next to the rosary. The caller ID read unavailable, misspelled and all. The number that showed on the phone was 666-666-6666. We all got spooked. I told him to answer it, but he didn't. After a while, I went home for the night. This all happened during the 3 days a year we have snow or ice in Texas. That'll be relevant here in a second. The next day we met up again, and I shit you not, there were these giant chicken prints that came from the creek we have to cross between our neighborhood and the cemetery, and they went right up to the window of his house where we all had been hanging out the night before. These prints were bigger than my hand. It had 3 toes facing forward and another smaller one facing backward, identical to a chicken, just much bigger. What's also weird is that the tracks just ended at the window. There were no tracks leaving the window. Does anyone have any clue what kind of demon, spirit, or cryptid could manipulate the phone and have a physical footprint like this? That's quite a story. There's just so much randomness here. I mean, a rosary, a tombstone, snowfall in Texas, a giant chicken, a satanic phone number. And I couldn't help but catch that phone number. I mean, the number to reach us here at the show and leave your story on our voicemail has a 666 as its exchange, but all sixes? That's a hell of a number. Couldn't resist, sorry. As far as the phone call goes, it could be phone number spoofing. In case you're not familiar, that's what it's called when someone alters the way their number and or caller ID shows on the receiver's end. Now, although this was, like you say, 11 or 12 years ago, it is still possible. That said, however, the timing is incredibly spooky if it was indeed just a random scammer call. And I noticed that you said the word unavailable was misspelled. It looks like it's missing the I. So I wonder if maybe just a friend messed with his phone, maybe put that in as a contact and misspelled it. Who knows? Now for the chicken foot, I feel like the easiest explanation, Occam's razor, right, is that this was a bird, not a chicken. A chicken, a flightless bird, couldn't just fly away and make it look like the tracks just stopped cold, nor is the size consistent with chicken feet. But let me ask you this. Forget the individual tracks for just a moment. What was the larger arrangement of the tracks? That will tell you a lot about the bird's gait and help you rule out some other suspects. Here are some examples of gaits that I know of and the birds that they belong to. If the tracks are aligned in pairs, with each foot planted right next to each other, that means the bird was hopping. A lot of times you'll find this with goldfinches, chickadees, cardinals, and the like. Now, skipping is something they also do, except that the tracks in each pair will look staggered. Now, this is common in American robins, song sparrows, snow bunnings, things like that forage on the ground. If you see single footprints that are regularly spaced out, then you have a walker, like a grouse, gull, duck, raptors, starlings, doves. They tend to fall into that category, but the individual marks will be further apart, that they're walking or running. Now keep in mind that birds also are dynamic, energetic creatures that might switch between different gaits as they move about the landscape. To help nail down the ID, a little more observation is required, which is where you were going with the shape of the feet, I believe. A single print can unlock a wealth of information about how your ghost behaves. Try categorizing by contour to narrow down the group a little bit more. Standard tracks, which in most treads you'll notice 3 toes in the front, 1 in the back, which is what you mentioned here. Game bird tracks have the hind toe as being so small it can be hard to spot. In fact, it may not even touch the ground at all, so no track would be made. Grouse, pheasants, turkeys, and ptarmigans leave these, along with some shorebirds and waders. If there's web tracks, if you see an outline that stretches between the 3 front toes, then you're looking at a duck, swan, goose, or gull. There are a few birds that have webbing between all 4 toes also. Now my favorite, zygodactyl. The arrangement consists of 2 toes in the front and 2 in the back, which allows birds to scramble up trees and grip branches or food with a little more stability than normal. Things like this are owls, woodpeckers, parrots, and roadrunners. I would take the size of the tracks you saw and cross-reference it with birds native to your area and their largest known specimens. Now, most of that bird info didn't come off the top of my head, thank God. It came from audubon.org. As a follow-up, I will say that I recall almost certainly reading about a giant chicken man sighting, and as if that already weren't weird enough, I feel like I read it in a book about the Winchester Mystery House. Now, I've spent 30 minutes or so trying to find something online to convince myself I'm not crazy and didn't hallucinate this, but to no avail. If I don't find it before recording this episode, which I haven't, I'm going to have some wings delivered and eat them outside to show these birds exactly what I'm capable of. If any of you happen to have read that same account, please let me know that I'm not completely insane. Drop a comment on any of our social media accounts, fire me off an email, leave a voicemail, or post it in this episode's discussion thread over at madlogicmysteries.proboards.com. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of this episode. Will your story be part of our next episode? You won't know if you don't submit it. The preferred submission method is you recording your story via video or audio recording and then emailing that to us as an attachment. The method is preferable from a sound quality and time limit standpoint. You could send audio, video, or just plain text. It's also extremely easy to just call us at 754-666-2566 and leave your story as a voicemail. Each voicemail is limited to 5 minutes, so if you run out of time, just call back and continue where you left off, and I can sort it out on this side. Our email address is madlogicmysteries@gmail.com. You can also post your story to one of our social media accounts, and please follow us on these as well. Our subreddit is just Mad Logic Mysteries, YouTube channel, Mad Logic Mysteries, Facebook, Mad Logic Mysteries, Instagram, Mad Logic Mysteries, Patreon, Mad Logic Mysteries, and Twitter. It's a little different. It's just singular, Mad Logic Mystery. You can also get to our message board, The Tomb, at madlogicmysteries.proboards.com. You can also leave a message telling your story via Anchor, anchor.fm/madlogicmysteries. By submitting your story, you do agree that we can use the content in upcoming episodes, and as always, you must be 18 or older to submit. But speaking of Patreon, that is still in the planning stages, and that's where I ask you for advice. What would you like to see as a perk or benefit of being a Patreon supporter? Call or email your suggestions. Mad Logic Mysteries is written and produced by me, Mad Logic. All audio and video used is done under the protection of fair use. The background music for this episode is by Coag Music, co.ag. I appreciate you joining us. Until next time, keep it creepy.